come here for a second, play with this chair, and tell me if it goes up any further.
Okay. It goes up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's kind of low for, I like the chair up high. There's a thingy there, and there's one here. Oh, nope, that made it go down.
Yep, you moved it down. So let's push that to.
Am I lifting up?
Nope. Well, that made it go down even more. Shit. Are we muted?
Will it go up if there's no weight
wait.
on the chair?
I think it. Okay, now try it.
Okay, good.
You gotta push both of them at the same time.
Oh, much better. I kept feeling like I was like down
Yeah,
here.
so that both of those little things, you have to push them both.
one?
So this one,
Okay.
and then on the other side. push
Okay,
them
I was
both
doing
at
only
the same
one.
time.
I'm like, I kept doing this.
I think
this.
that's what it was.
But I felt
doing.
like my chin was like right here on the.
Did that raise it at all?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it's definitely better. Yay, thank you.
All right, unlocking the courtroom.
Thank you. All right.
I'm like, you never know. Like, I thought it was only gonna be like 62 or something today, so. But it's warm. All right. My shoe is still hurting my foot.
All right, doctor's ready, so we can grab our jurors. Okay.
All rise.
Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect the presence of our jurors, Dr. Wilson, counsel, as well as the parties. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for being on time as usual. We left off with cross-examination of Dr. Wilson. You may proceed. You're welcome.
Dr. Wilson, you testified yesterday that Dr. Powell and Dr. Etling, they are clinical psychologists or
neuropsychologists.
Neuropsychologists, sorry.
They're clinical psychologists first. That's how we're licensed, but they're trained as neuropsychologists.
Neuropsychologists. How is that in relation to a psychiatrist? higher,
Psychiatry,
sorry,
I mean, they're different
field?
columns. So the psychology, we specialize in behavior, and we spend as much time as physicians study medicine. We study behavior and thinking and motivation and perception. Physicians are first and foremost doctors, medical doctors, or doctors of osteopathy. And then they specialize for a year to two to qualify to be something like a psychiatrist, for example. And then just as with neuropsychology, to become certified as a board certified psychiatrist or board certified neurologist, they have to go through extra study and assorted exams. So we're sort of, comparing levels doesn't work. Doctors will always tell you that they're on the top, but psychologists will say we're doing different things that are complementary. So
You stated that you relied on some or part of Dr. Powell and Dr. Ettling's records for the determination for Mr. Johansson. Is that correct?
yes, I relied on the testing, the scores, the tests they used, but I will say relied on cautiously. And I did rescore some of the data that I was able to do that with.
You had stated there was severe mistakes in their testing. Is that true?
I did not say severe mistakes. There were some errors in scoring. There were some oversights that I thought were really surprising. If I were supervising them, I would have chewed them out, but I'm not. They are technically my peers. So I will just say they let some things go that I would not have let go under any circumstances.
Were they testing for Lewy body or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or all of them?
Dr. Ettling was given basically sort of, we've got a dementia developing here. There seem to be some Parkinsonian components, but we don't know what we've got. So he was the first to basically, do what we do, which is establish cognitive strengths, weaknesses, look at the pattern and go, this doesn't fit Alzheimer's. There isn't enough motor Parkinson's symptoms to be Parkinson's. That leaves us with Lewy body dementia. Dr. Powell was more or less asked to give it a second look, but it wasn't as if anyone was really doubting the diagnosis at that point. But you also want to see how much decline there's been. So she was looking at it less diagnostically and more in terms of how much change has there been.
Did her findings confirm Dr. Ettling's?
Yes.
Their findings determine the same thing, basically.
Well, she showed that there had been deterioration, but it was the kind of change that was still totally consistent with Lewy body. She might have at that point found, whoa, this does look like Alzheimer's. It just came on funny. But in her case, she looked at the data and she said, nope, we still got a pretty clear picture of Lewy body dementia.
So basically she confirmed Dr. Ettling's diagnosis?
Yes. And said that it was worsening as predicted.
And Dr. Ettling's diagnosis was Lewy body?
Correct.
If you stated there was mistakes in their diagnosis, then how could their diagnosis be accurate if they overlooked certain things or didn't see it or take it into account?
The pattern of change, they made errors in scoring that were significant more in terms of how much deterioration there was. It wasn't like somebody was normal and they scored it abnormal, or somebody was impaired and they said it was normal. It was more a question of somebody said it was low average and in fact it was mildly impaired. So it's more a matter of degree. The overall pattern that they both developed based on a whole lot of different tests and some similar tests was consistent. So it wasn't that they misdiagnosed, but they made some questionable interpretations in terms of the severity of changes.
Was the diagnosis mild cognitive impairment?
Mild cognitive impairment was not, to my knowledge, formally given. The first diagnosis that we see in the primary care doctor's records was early dementia or questionable dementia, which back then probably would have been diagnosed as mild cognitive impairment if he'd been seen by someone who knew what they were doing.
Was there also a statement in there of being possible Lewy bodies disease?
Yes, I mean, Dr. Ettling essentially, when you do the first diagnosis, you want to be cautious because people can change. Even though it was a very clear Lewy body presentation, Dr. Ettling, I think, cautiously said possible Lewy body dementia, and then that was subsequently confirmed by Dr. Taylor and by Dr. Powell.
Would it be a fair assessment to say that Lewy bodies is an elusive disease to diagnose?
Well, as I said yesterday, because it comes on in a variety of initial presentations, some people look depressed, some look sort of intermittently delirious, some look a little more Parkinsonian. It can get misdiagnosed or it can get overlooked, and particularly because memory is relatively intact, language is intact, and so primary care docs may not know what they're looking at. Something's not right here, but it doesn't look like Alzheimer's, so I don't know what it is. And so it may get shuffled along for a few years until somebody says, okay, we've got enough clear symptoms, or someone does testing like Dr. Ettling and say, we've got a clear profile, we can diagnose it. So I don't know that it's elusive. It's a little tricky to diagnose.
Basically an enigma then, because it's...
No, not an enigma. Enigma says that you don't know what you're looking at. It's tricky to diagnose because you really have to collect information from different sources. And most general practitioners now are able to say, I can do a basic memory test and I can say this looks like Alzheimer's and go along, and there are other tests that can be given to show certain kinds of brain changes. Lewy body, there are some scans, but they are extremely expensive and they're not definitive. So you're really left with good observation and cognitive testing. So it's a little trickier and more difficult to diagnose, but I mean, once you've seen it a couple times, you know what you're looking at.
Well, my next question would be then, if it's that difficult for trained professionals to diagnose, how could the average person come in contact with someone like Mr. Johansson and know that he has this issue, this problem, or this decline, if it's not evident and he can hold a conversation and all of that? It just doesn't make sense that...
You're missing a couple things. I mean, diagnosis is not a thing, it's an idea. It's saying all these pieces hang together and they look like this condition, so we ought to treat this person like they've got that condition until we know otherwise. Whereas the cognitive, you may not be able to know the diagnosis. The endocrinologist certainly didn't know the diagnosis in 2014, 2015, but he knew something was wrong. He knew that there were confusion episodes. He knew that Gary Johansson was not able to manage his own diabetes and his own blood sugar measurements and insulin. So it's not like trained professionals don't know something's off. They just may not be able to say, I know what this picture is. Whereas someone like a neurologist or a neuropsychologist can look at it and go, I know what this picture is.
That's my question then. If a trained professional can't see it clearly, even with screening tests, how is the average person to come in contact with someone like this? How would they possibly even know that a person has this type of issue without it being manifested physical or showing in some type?
Again, I think you're confusing diagnosis with reality. I would not expect the average person or even most PCPs, primary care docs, to be able to say, this is early Lewy body dementia. But I would expect them to be able to say something is wrong with this person. I see some motor signs and I see some confusion, and they may call it forgetfulness because they're not sophisticated, but they would know something is wrong. So the reality is there is cognitive impairment. It is obvious. It is clear to people who spend time with someone that something's off. Donna knew something was off. I suspect, although I have not spoken to him, that Gary Johansson's son recognized something was off, but they wouldn't be able to put a name to it. They would know that there was a problem. So I think a person interacting with him on any kind of ongoing or prolonged basis would be able to say, I'm not sure this guy is firing on all cylinders, but I wouldn't for a minute expect them to be able to say, this is Lewy body dementia. Most people will just say, dementia, and be thinking Alzheimer's.
To me, you're describing an enigma because it keeps shifting. Because from diagnosis,
What's your question? You're testifying.
the diagnosis, is the diagnosis supposed to be consistent with the actions or the physical results?
The diagnosis is based on the actions, based on the behavior, based on the cognitive pattern. And when we have enough pieces of cognitive pattern or behavior or mood, we say, this is the probable name we give it. Diagnosis is not a real thing. It's an idea that groups together a bunch of symptoms. Sometimes those symptoms change and the diagnosis or the name changes with it. Diagnosis is really just a label for what you're seeing and what you can measure. Or what you're experiencing. And I think you're taking it as if I don't know that's Lewy body dementia, I wouldn't know anything is wrong. And I'm saying you may not know what's wrong, but you would be able to tell something is wrong.
You testified that that they would be agreeable to something with Lewy body or dementia if it was favorable to them, but they would more like resistance if it was difficult for them. Is that true?
No, that's not quite what I said. What I said was if something is presented in a way that reduces anxiety or fretfulness or simplifies the confusion or that makes them feel comfortable or supported, they will be much more inclined to go with that and to go with that person, trust that person, let that person become a source of, authority, if you will, listen to their advice. If it's imposed on them, if someone says, you're confused and you don't know what you're doing, so I'm going to take charge, or honey, you can't handle your own diabetes medications, you've got to let me do it now. Most people, male or female, would, take some exception to that. When you've got cognitive problems and you can't see that they're right, you can't see that, holy mackerel, I'm not doing well with this, there's a bigger tendency for outbursts, particularly in men. And that is particularly true in Parkinson's and Lewy body as opposed to Alzheimer's. They are more likely to be irritable and reactive earlier, whereas with Alzheimer's tends to come a little bit later.
Then why would Gary be so resistant to his wife helping if he knew it was for his own good?
No, but what I'm saying is he doesn't have insight. He doesn't know or doesn't recognize. And I'm not saying he's stubborn. I'm saying his brain doesn't process that he's not doing this very well. And he then is intact enough to be able to sort of make his own excuses. He lacks insight, and it's not a conscious thing. The area of the brain that lets us look at our behavior or look at our thoughts, a little bit of objectivity and say, I'm not doing as well at that as I should be. That gets damaged very early in pretty much all the dementias, and certainly in Lewy body dementia. He's not able to stand back and say, I need help. But if you approach him in a way that what you're doing is just providing sort of a floor under his confusion, giving him a sense of stability, he doesn't need to have insight. He feels more comfortable. Nobody's challenging him. He's going to go with that. That is human nature. That is basic psychology 101. As opposed to someone coming in and saying, you don't have insight. You don't know how badly you're doing. Somebody needs to take charge here. That is going to feel more anxiety producing, more upsetting, and increase the confusion and the resistance.
This would apply to someone he knows or he doesn't know, or both.
Both.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor, for your time.
Thank you. Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Dr. Wilson, you were questioned by Mr. Casavelli in regards to a part of your report that referred to adult protective services. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
And do you recall the testimony or his question about adult protective services finding that no exploitation had taken place?
No. Yes.
And then you gave an explanation, I believe, as to why you believe they arrived at that testimony based on your past experiences dealing with adult protective services. Is that correct?
Yes. And also partly it was in the body of their report.
Okay. And then in terms of that explanation, I think you stated several reasons. And could you just recap those just very succinctly?
Sure. First and foremost, once attorneys are involved, once any authorities have stepped into a situation, it is actually policy for APS to remove themselves from the situation efficiently, but making sure.
What's your objection? One moment, Doctor.
Is she qualified to make this?
She's clarifying her previous testimony. Your objection's overruled. You may continue, Doctor.
I have also trained and worked with APS over the years many times, so I know their policies. So part of it was once they learned there was litigation beginning and that there were lawyers involved, it's no longer really their bailiwick. In addition, they were not aware of the $127,000 check, so they didn't consider that in terms of looking at exploitation. They also looked at the records in the county recorder's office and did not see that the deed to the house had transferred. But you don't look there. You look at the county assessor's office. That's where those kinds of things show up. It may eventually get cleared up in deeds in the county recorder's office. But if you're going to look at transfer of a parcel, that is first and foremost going to the county assessor's office. They should have known that, but they looked in the wrong place. So A, they didn't know about a $127,000 check, and B, it looked like the house had never transferred. So where's the exploitation? And C, there are lawyers involved. We don't need to be here anymore.
And they had not been.
That's why they closed it.
And is it also true that they were not aware of the purported commission payments?
I think that's true too.
Thank you. And considering what the Adult Protective Services report stated, does it in any way change the medically documented symptoms reported about Mr. Johansson in 2014, 15, 16, 17, and 18?
No, it does not.
And knowing what you know about the Adult Protective Services conclusion, does it in any way change your conclusions in this matter that Gary Johansson was a vulnerable adult going back to as far as November of 2015?
It does not change that. I want to stress APS does not determine vulnerability. They don't try to. They know they can't do it. They also do not look at undue influence. That is not their area. They look at tangible evidence of exploitation, neglect, and abuse, and that is all they look at.
Thank you. And just to be clear, you mentioned earlier that you reviewed a great many of Banner Hospital exhibits, and I think you referred to exhibits 63, 64, 65, 66, and 67, which you had available to you that we had provided prior to your testimony today. Is that correct?
I think that's correct, yes. Yep.
And those are all exhibits that have been marked into evidence in this matter. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to testify about them. Is that correct?
You got me there.
Fair enough. I think I took great issue earlier with a statement you made about older gentlemen making sandwiches when their spouses weren't around. And I think that you said that that defined them as old, and that therefore categorizes me as old. So I think you've got me right back.
Your objection? Go ahead.
Is there a question in that, or just give?
Sustained. No question.
Testifying.
Incorporated, the exhibits I referred to from Banner Hospital, exhibits 63 through 67, your review and your conclusions in this matter incorporated all of those records in coming to your ultimate conclusion. Is that correct?
Correct.
Mr. Casavelli also asked you about some issues with drawing an X in the middle of a rectangular box. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, I do.
And specifically, you mentioned some question was asked about whether tremors could affect the ability to do that. And I wanted to know if you actually observed any tremors in Mr. Johansson when he was conducting that test.
Tremors were not a problem for him. He simply was not able to mentally, his brain was not able to process the incoming visual information or to control what he produced when he tried to copy it. But it wasn't a question of motor abilities or tremor.
Thank you. All right. Does the definition of exploitation mean Gary was not able to protect himself as he normally would?
Well, the definition of vulnerability.
I'm sorry, vulnerability, yes.
Yes, that's sort of the core of it, is due to some kind of impairment, the person is not able to protect their own interests. They even may believe that what they're doing is what they want to do, but they're not able to see or understand that it's not in their interest, or, for example, that they're actually diverting resources they need to somewhere else. So they're not able to protect themselves from exploitation.
Does the notion of being susceptible to undue influence mean that Gary and or Donna had a reduced ability to protect themselves?
Yes.
All right. How reliable is a probable diagnosis of Lewy body dementia while the affected person is still alive?
The reading I've done suggests, they're getting better and better with that. It was right around 2017 that they changed and updated the criteria for that diagnosis and made them a little tighter. So now the diagnosis is accurate around 85 to 90% of the time. But they do find that a number of people who accurately have that diagnosis also have significant Alzheimer's brain changes, cellular changes, even though they may not have looked like an Alzheimer's person. Back in 2015, it was probably closer to, 80%, but I feel in this case that the workups that were done were pretty thorough and comprehensive, and so I feel confident in the diagnosis. I certainly feel confident in saying the syndrome that he had of symptoms and cognitive problems was very significant. It was steadily deteriorating, and it fits best with a Lewy body diagnosis.
And am I correctly summarizing your testimony that it's Dr. Ettling, Dr. Powell, and Dr. Taylor who all found Gary to have diffuse Lewy body dementia dating back to November of 2015?
I'm not sure they all said. Diffuse now has a different meaning. That was what we used to call all Lewy body dementia, but now we know that there's actually a subtype where the Lewy bodies, which are like, I mean, they're sort of like little flaws in every cell, a little black splotch in every cell. And when they're really widespread, that's diffuse, and that often goes along with Alzheimer's. Now we just call it Lewy body dementia, and we say whether it comes on psychiatrically with depression, with fluctuating consciousness and delirium, or with more motoric kinds of signs. So he had what I would call the psychiatric or depressive form of Lewy body dementia, and that was consistent.
And Dr. Ettling, Dr. Powell, and Dr. Taylor remained consistent in their belief from November 2015 until, I believe, Dr. Taylor was in 2018.
He was 2016.
And Dr. Powell was later in
Oh,
2017.
Dr. Powell was 2017, yes.
Yeah. And so all three of them were consistent in maintaining there was some form of Lewy body dementia going on in Mr. Johansson.
Yes, and Dr. Taylor was the one who said, almost certainly the depression was a piece of the Lewy body dementia, not a separate condition.
So in other words, the diagnosis of the condition of Lewy body dementia is not something that you've come up with today,
Correct.
or in your report after you met with the Johanssons in 2018, correct?
Correct.
This has actually been the working diagnosis of 3 separate and prior physicians who treated Mr. Johansson.
Yes. And it may very well have been of his first neurologist, who, as best we can tell from secondary medical records, had said early dementia with Parkinsonian features. That's sort of a shorthand for we've got some mild cognitive impairment, could go towards Parkinson's, could go towards Lewy body, but the diagnosis, once one was given, has been consistent across all the professionals.
Thank you. And you were asked some questions about the differences between Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and maybe a general dementia. If Gary had Parkinson's clear back to November 2015 instead of Lewy body dementia, would you still consider him a vulnerable adult?
You're starting to treat the diagnosis like it's a separate thing. Again, if he had pure Parkinson's, he may or may not have had cognitive impairments. Pure Parkinson's is a motor disease with tremor and slowing, drooling, and sort of stiff muscles of the face, falls, inability to get out of a chair. And although we know that the majority of people, by the time they're diagnosed with Parkinson's, do have some executive dysfunction, most of them are not demented until 5 or 10 years into the disease of Parkinsonism. So I can't say that had he gotten an accurate Parkinson's diagnosis that he would be just as impaired. He would have a different kind of impairment. Same would be if it were true with Alzheimer's, although there his memory would have been very badly affected by the time we saw him.
And Doctor, in asking that question, my purpose in that is the diagnosis is not so much important as what the symptomology is. And
Exactly.
And based on the symptomology he was encountering clear back to November of 2015, would he be a vulnerable adult?
Yes, and again, I want to stress, he didn't suddenly walk in with flatly impaired executive and attentional abilities on November 15. He'd been in decline for a long time before that to reach that point, but that was the first time anybody looked at the whole pattern at one sitting and could see, okay, this is the picture that we've got. Prior to that, it was a bit piecemeal.
Thank you, Doctor. I have no further questions.
May this witness be excused.
Subject to
No, you already had your cross-examination. Thank you, doctor. You are excused.
Thank you
Dr.
very
Wilson.
much.
You may call your next witness.
I'd like to call Donna Johansson to the stand, please.
You may.
Wow. Not scheduled here.
Good afternoon. Please raise your right hand to be sworn. You do solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you. Please be comfortable. There's water there, and please speak into the microphone. Thank you. Counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Donna, can you please state your name?
Donna Johansson.
And are you one of the plaintiffs in this matter?
Yes, I am.
And are you representing yourself individually
And my husband.
through his estate as personal representative? Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. How long were you married to Gary Johansson?
Almost 55 years.
And so it might be fair to say that you knew him well.
I guess so.
Very good. Did you go to college?
Yes.
And where did you go?
At University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh.
And what was your degree in there?
Elementary education and BS in science.
And did you ultimately use that to teach?
Yes.
And where did you teach at?
I taught in 3 different schools, all in Wisconsin. Marinette, Wisconsin, Kewaskum, Wisconsin, and then again for Kewaskum.
And in regards to my opening statement, you noted an error about the number of years I had listed there as being taught. Can you please tell the court what the number of years are that you taught third grade, please?
12 years.
12 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And is there a reason you didn't teach all the way from the time you graduated college until you retired?
Mm-hmm.
And what was that reason?
We had a son, and I wanted to stay home and take care of him.
Very good. And how did that son turn out?
I think pretty good.
All right. Do you happen to know where your husband, Gary Johansson, went to college at?
Mm-hmm. He went to college at a state college called Moorhead in Moorhead, Minnesota. And then he went to graduate school at Northern Michigan University in Marquette, and that's where I met Gary.
You met him at Northern University in Marquette?
Mm-hmm.
And you were attending, and you have to say yes or no.
Yes.
Don't count. Yeah. So, and were you attending college at North, or at the same college he was taking his master's degree at?
Northern Michigan. We met in statistics class.
Okay. And then how long after you all met were you married? Do you remember what year you
A
were
year later.
married?
We were married in 1961.
All
I
right.
mean, no, in 1964. I graduated from college in 1961.
Okay. And then do you happen to know what degree Gary obtained for his undergraduate degree?
Yes, he has, his courses were in business.
Okay. And his master's degree, did he complete that?
Yes, he did,
And what was that degree in, please?
in counseling.
Okay. What kind of work did he end up doing for his career?
He started out as a teacher in Campbellsport, Wisconsin, when I was teaching. And then from there, he went to Cedar Lake Home and that was in West Bend, Wisconsin. And then from Cedar Lake Home, at Cedar Lake Home, he got his training. He was an assistant administrator of a home
Okay.
of all levels of care, and he helped develop that. And the man that ran it was a man called Reverend Reish. It was a church-related home with the United Church of Christ. And from there, he wanted to find out if he could run a home on his own. And so he did testing and so forth. And then we went to Chicago for an interview. And he decided he thought it would be a good place for him. And so he entered there as an administrator of the home in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, into an area called Beverly, which was an area where people that worked downtown, the judges and people that worked in the courthouse, the firemen and the policemen all kind of lived in this area.
And what was the name of the home that he hired onto at that point in time?
Washington Jane Smith Home.
Washington and Jane Smith Home?
Yes. It was named after a lady in honor of her parents, and they were merchants in Chicago, and she gave money to start this home.
And do you know approximately when he began his employment at Washington Jane Smith Home?
Yes, I do. In about 1980.
And do you know when he retired, or do you know when he left his position at that home?
Yes. In 2002.
In 2002. So he was there 22 years. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. What was his title, or what did his position entail?
Well, he started out as an administrator. It's a long-term care facility. It has all levels of care, from independent to assisted to long-term. And
did that work involve taking care of elderly people then?
yes,
And did it involve managing a staff there at the home?
yes.
Do you have a sense of how many people that your husband would have managed while he was there?
Well, he had a director of nursing. He had a director of housekeeping, bookkeeping service. Probably about 7 or 8, or
Seven.
maybe more.
7 that were directly under
They would be directly under him. And then they had many employees. I don't know how many employees.
many other employees under those 7 sub-directors.
Yes.
Okay. What was Gary's title at the time that he resigned from the home to retire?
He was an executive director because over the years that he was there, they decided to build another facility. It was a non-profit organization, and they decided to build out in the suburbs. And so he bought the land so that they could build this new facility. And then when he got that facility built, then they made him the overseer of the 2 campuses. And that also was all levels of care. That also contained individual homes. So you could go into an apartment, or you could go into individual homes. Now, he left before that was completed because it was going to take longer to have it fully developed, like another 3 years, and he didn't feel that he wanted to have another 3 years because he was having problems at that time with his diabetes, and he wanted to get out here and play golf.
Was your husband good at his job?
I think so. He had many honors and many wonderful letters from the people that lived there and the employees. And I knew most of the department heads, and he had a good relationship with them. And to this day, there are still 2 of the gals that are alive, and I am in contact with them. So it was a wonderful experience for me also.
I'm going to show Exhibit 110.
Thank you.
May I approach?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Johansson, I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibit number 110, and I'd like you to take a look at that if you would. On page 1, do you recognize what that is a picture of?
It's from the state, Illinois State Senate. It was from Patrick O'Malley.
Have you seen this before?
Oh, yes. I have a copy of it hanging on the wall.
All right, is it something that Gary Johansson received from the city?
Yes, it is. He received this from the state.
In Your Honor, I'm going to go page by page on this particular exhibit.
Thank you.
So on page 1, I'd like to move that into admission, that this is a document that she recognizes and has awareness of.
Move to admit after you've gone through each page.
Move to admit page. You want me to move to admit after the whole thing?
We'd have to separate the exhibits, so
Okay.
move to admit the exhibit after you lay the foundation on each one of the attachments.
Very good.
Thank you, sir.
All right, would you look at page 2?
Okay.
And looking at page 2, do you recognize what is pictured there as well?
Yes, I do.
Is that a document you've seen before?
Yes, it is.
Is it a document or a picture of an award or an honor that your husband received?
Yes, it is.
All right, can you look at page 3? Are you familiar with this document?
I'm very familiar with this one.
Is it related to an award or an honor that Gary Johansson received?
Yes.
Move to the next page, please. Looking at 4th page, is this a document that you're familiar with?
I sure am.
Right. Is it a document that relates to an award or honor of Mr. Johansson?
Yes, it is.
And would you flip to the next page, please? Do you recognize the document or the picture that's shown on this page?
Yes, I do.
And is it a document that is reflecting an award or honor for Mr. Johansson?
Yes, this is from his board,
Okay,
that the one that hired him and
okay.
oversaw him.
And then the next page, do you recognize this picture as well?
This
Yes.
is from Mayor Daley.
And do you recognize it to be an award or honor to Gary Johansson?
Yes, it is.
And is there any other pages there? If there is, turn to
No.
that. That's it. Move to admit, Your Honor.
Any objection to the admission of Exhibit 110?
No.
110 is admitted.
Donna, if you'll look over at the screen next to you there. This is page 1. Yeah, you've testified that you recognize this document. Can you tell us what this is, please?
It's just an honor given him by the state senator, Patrick O'Malley.
By a state senator? And is it for his accomplishments in running the Washington and Jane Smith home?
And also, it listed on here his background.
Okay. And if I could, can you pull that microphone a little bit closer to you while you're turned that way so the jury can hear you?
Like this?
Yes, that's great. Thank you. And then the next page, this is page 2. I'm going to scroll down here so you can see the whole thing. Can you tell us what this document is?
It's from the General Assembly of the State of Illinois.
All right. And it's awarded to Gary T. Johansson. And what is it in recognition for? Can you read that to the
His years
jury?
of service to the home.
All right. Thank you. And looking at page 3, I'm showing you another document that is titled Resolution. Can you tell the jury what this was for, please?
It tells all the things that he contributed to.
Okay. And then that document is from whom? Do you know?
Not without looking.
Okay. Let me see. All right.
He got many honors, so I don't know which
Okay.
person gave him this honor.
Could this have been from the Board of Trustees at the
Oh,
home?
the Board of Trustees are the people that employed him.
Okay. And then looking at this, what's pictured on the next page here, what does this depict in the top picture there, please?
It showed that they named the street after him.
And this is in Chicago?
Yes,
Very nice.
it's a street that goes into the home.
And then at the bottom picture there, what does that depict?
That depicts that, well, he was there, he devised this new wing for the home. And it was an assisted living wing. And so they named the building after him. It's called the Johansson Wing.
Very nice. And does this also confirm his tenure at the home from 1980 to 2002?
Yes, it does.
And lastly, we have another portion of a resolution here. Does this relate to another honor that's being bestowed upon?
That maybe was from Ginger. She was the, what would we call them? Like the, underneath the mayor. This was from the mayor, okay.
Okay,
And he also got from the person that was in charge of the ward that the home was in. He got an award from them.
very nice. And lastly, this last picture in the exhibit, what does this depict? Who's it from?
This is from the mayor.
Okay, of the city of Chicago?
Yep.
And again, are they thanking him for his years of service at the assisted living home?
Right.
Thank you very much. We heard a lot of testimony from Dr. Wilson just preceding your coming to the stand. Did you hear Dr. Wilson's testimony clearly regarding the onset of Gary's health issues?
I sure did.
Imagine that was a little bit difficult.
It was hard. It brought back a lot of things, you know.
Yeah. Listening to what Dr. Wilson said, do you agree with Dr. Wilson's report that Gary suffered from a diagnosis of Lewy body dementia since November of 2015?
Probably, yes, I do.
And do you agree with Dr. Wilson's assessment that he may have had something, a earlier diagnosis possibly listed as dementia as early as October of 2014?
Yes, I do.
All right. Do you agree with Dr. Wilson's report that Gary was having memory and cognitive problems reported as early as January of 2014?
Yes, I do.
And just from your personal experience, how did the Lewy body dementia affect Gary when you were with him and around him?
At the very beginning?
Start at the beginning and then just take us through progressively.
Okay. I can tell you one thing about this Lewy body disease. It's a gradual thing. It doesn't happen overnight. And so when you're living with a person and they're starting to have a few problems, you're not aware of it. You think, oh, they made a mistake. And so you just kind of overlook it. But then when it happens more often, you become a little concerned. And things that happened with him, I don't know about anyone else. I can only tell you about living with him. It was his memory of things. He couldn't remember, like he put down his keys and he couldn't remember where he put them. And usually you can backtrack and find your keys. He couldn't do that. That was just one incident. And the other one I noticed that got worse over the years was his temper. He wasn't always real mild. As you know, when you're married that long, you have good days and bad days, but when you look over it all, it was pretty good. But anyway, he would, it was a gradual thing, but then he would forget more things. And one of the incidents that I really remember is when he went to Dr. Paul. That was our primary care doctor. And one of our little guys was playing in Pop League football, and he got hit in the head, and so they wouldn't allow him to play football at the next game. And this kid wanted to play that football at the next game. And so he they asked us if we would take him to the doctor. And Gary said, well, I'm going to see my doctor tomorrow. I'll take him with me and have this slip sign. Well, he went to see the doctor, his doctor, which was his primary care doctor, and he told him he could not sign that slip because of rules and regulations, that he was a primary care doctor for the elderly and not for our little guy. It didn't turn out to be a big deal because the next day I took him to his pediatrician and he got it signed. But in the meantime, he was so irate with that doctor. I mean, he came home and he banged down the paper and he just went into all kinds of commotion over this because he didn't sign Kevin's slip. And it was just a really, really big thing with him. And so he said the next day, he said, I'm not going back to that doctor. I'm finding a new doctor, which he did. And that's when he got to see Dr. O'Coin.
So in what you just recounted, was his behavior coming back from the doctor's office and being that angry uncharacteristic for him as you knew him over most of the years of your marriage?
Well, I wouldn't think he'd be like that, you know.
Right. And do you recall?
I mean, he would have said that doctor wouldn't sign it. So Donna, you'll have to take him to the pediatrician, but not now.
And do you recall about what the month and year was when that occurred?
No.
Okay.
It's just there's so many years ago and so much has happened.
Right. Did his conduct that day startle you or scare you or cause you to be fearful?
Well, it woke me up. I'm like, oh, wow, you've really made a big deal of this.
Yeah. You talked about how his condition progressed. Do you remember any other instances in maybe 2016 or 17 about how his condition was?
Oh, the biggest thing was the driving.
And tell us about the driving. Did he want to?
He went. So I would say this incident probably happened around 2014 with Kevin and going to Dr. Paul.
Okay.
Because in 2016 is when he went to Dr. O'Coin, and he hadn't been going to him for real long. So it was 2015, 2016, in that area. I'm not sure. And so anyway, in 2016, he had an appointment to see Dr. O'Coin, and he had been going to him. And Dr. O'Coin told him he couldn't drive. And then Dr. O'Coin called me and said, why did you allow him to drive? I said, I didn't know there was a big problem. It was just like, I don't know. I never had any problems, with him driving. But I had my own car and he had his own car. So I didn't really know. And he said, I'm not allowing him to go home until you come up to my office and appear to me. And then I want you to follow him home. We're talking probably, let's see, that would be around 3 miles. And so I followed him home. And he said at that time that he cannot drive anymore. That was in 2016, I believe.
And from the point that Dr. Aucoin said that he couldn't drive anymore, did you attempt to take the keys from him?
I did.
And how?
He was mad at me. I mean, he was really, he called me everything that you could ever think of. And I know how hard it was for him not to be able to drive.
And from that point on, did you attempt to keep him from driving at all possible times?
I tried. Yes, I did.
All right. Did that problem with keeping him from driving, did that create problems between you and Gary?
Oh, it was awful. It was just every time he wanted to do something or go something, he'd have a big fit about it, you know, because he wanted to do his thing.
And did that make it difficult for you to help him as he progressed with his various symptoms?
It was hard. It was really hard.
Yeah.
But you know, you know what she said today too, but when you're living with that person, these things, I guess you're so used to that person that when they flounder around the way, you just kind of help them out as much as you can. And so sometimes you don't even recognize some of the things that they're doing because they got a few problems, so you help them. And you also have to remember that the years that we were married, it was a different society than it is now. So in 1964, when we were married, it was the lady's job to take care of her husband. And what he did and wanted you to do, that was supposed to be first in your life. Not that it always was, but it was supposed to be that way. And so that was kind of how I was at the beginning of a marriage. And so when my son got married to Elena, and I saw he's putting the dishes away, he's scrubbing the floor, I'm like, oh my goodness, what kind of woman did he marry? Because I wasn't used to that. That wasn't the role that I had. Because at that time, the woman took care of her husband. And so he was very upset with me teaching school when we first got married. Because I was an elementary school teacher. And my job didn't end at the end of the day. At that time, you couldn't go out and buy programs and things for the kids, so you made them all by hand. And it was fun for me, and I loved it, and I loved teaching school. But he didn't think so much about it because sometimes his supper would be late. He would come home, and I'd maybe just be rushing in the door because a parent came to school or something happened at school and I had to take care of it, or I had to have lesson plans in for the next week and I didn't have them done. And so I had to do it that night to get them in. And so those were all things that were upsetting him, and he didn't like my job, but I liked my job.
Donna, let me ask you another follow-up question here. After listening to Dr. Wilson's testimony today, do you agree with her that Gary suffered from depression?
Yes.
And did you witness that depression personally?
Oh, yes.
And was he suffering that depression back in 2016 and 2017?
Yes.
And how would that depression work itself out? When you observed it, what did you observe to show you that he was suffering a depressive episode?
He was very outrageous and things, you know. Every little thing was a great big thing then.
Would he threaten to take his own life? Or
yes. Oh, yes.
Did he do that often?
Yes.
He did that?
Well, he did that when things weren't going his way.
Okay.
He said, I think I'll kill myself. You'd be better off without me.
Okay. And how did that affect you?
It made me sad.
All right.
Made me sad. And then I told the doctors about it, and they did give him some medication. I don't know if it helped or not, but he still would have these spells of depression.
And talk a little bit, if you would, about Gary's diabetes. Did you attempt to assist him with treating his diabetes?
Of course I did.
And how successful did he allow you to be?
At times, very successful. At other times, it was awful. And there were days that he didn't take his insulin because he wouldn't.
And what would happen on days when he wouldn't take his insulin? How would that affect him?
He would be very high, and then I would have to try to get it down.
And how would that affect him physically? How did it manifest? What would you see when his blood sugar was high? Was he able to think clearly?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. And then when he would get probably 500 once in a while. He wasn't 500 a lot, but he was in the 200 and 300s quite a bit.
And would he ever drop way low or go down to a low level in terms of his sugar?
Yeah, when he was low, he was dizzy.
He'd get dizzy. Did that affect his ability to walk and to ambulate?
Oh, yes. He couldn't. He couldn't. And so then the best thing that I don't know if this is right or wrong, but what I did is I'd give him something that had a lot of sugar in it. And then he'd get very high. So I'd have to see that he had more insulin. But he basically gave himself the insulin.
So Dr. Wilson said that regulating his diabetes was difficult and hard to manage. Do you concur with that
Oh,
opinion?
yes, I do. And he went to a very, very fine doctor.
Excellent. For the last half of 2016 and through July of 2017, was Gary able to, for lack of a better term, toilet himself? Was he able to do that on his own?
To do what?
To toilet himself?
Yes, I think, yes, he was able to do that.
And what about the ability to dress himself? Was he able to do that completely alone, or did you have to assist him in between the time of the last half of 2016 through July of 2017?
I helped him along, but he would do most of it, but I would help him. No.
From July 26, or from halfway through 2016 through July of 2017, did you witness Gary fall at any time?
Yes, I think that's when he broke his hip.
Okay.
I think in 2015, he broke his hip.
And when he fell, was he able to get himself back up, or did he need assistance?
He needed assistance, and Nick helped him.
Okay, so you called for help?
I called Nick, and Nick came over and helped us.
Okay. Do you agree with Dr. Wilson's assessment in her report as to Gary's issues with operating computers and telephones?
He was never good with the telephone. Nikki helped us with the phone.
Okay.
And she will verify both of us were very bad on the phone.
How was Gary on the computer in, say, 2017?
Not good. In 17, he wasn't good.
Could he operate the computer at all in any way in 2017?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't know for sure on that. I don't know when he stopped using the computer. I can't remember that date.
Okay.
But it was always very secretive to him. So I'm not sure when he stopped using that, because he would go in his office and close the door. And most of the time he'd take the key out. It was up above. Nick is laughing. He knows all about that. He was very, very secretive on the computer. So I can't tell you when he stopped using the computer.
Okay. Do you agree with Dr. Wilson's opinion that Gary was a vulnerable adult beginning at least by October 2016 and going possibly back to November of 2015?
I would guess so. I would have to believe what she thought because, as I say, I couldn't tell you what medical people were saying because I was the one that was viewing what was happening, but they were giving the answers. So I don't know.
Just based on the symptoms that Gary was exhibiting in November of 2015, would you agree that he was a vulnerable adult and had some kind of inability to protect himself as completely as he had in prior years?
Probably so because of reports done with Dr. Etling and Dr. Powell.
Okay. What kind of symptoms did you personally witness with Gary's dementia and or Lewy body diagnosis? Did you witness did you witness confusion in terms of keeping on track with a topic? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm, meaning yes or no? Did you witness an inability or a diminishment in Gary's ability to make decisions and process complex information?
Well, I've got to tell you one thing. He was the decision maker in the family because that's the way it was since we were married. He made the decisions. You can ask Nick. He was the one that made all of the decisions. And so whether they were right or wrong, I usually followed them.
My question, though, is did you witness him having difficulty making those decisions, or did you see that those decisions were not as well thought out as they were in prior years?
I'd have to say yes to that.
Okay. And would that be true in 2016 and 2017?
Yes.
Thank you. Did Gary suffer from low blood pressure?
The reports say that he did.
And do you know how that low blood pressure may have affected him as well?
If I remember right, when he had the low blood pressure, they gave him medication for it because he would be very dizzy and not stable.
Okay, and would that affect his ability to keep from falling?
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, all right.
You know, those are the things I don't really know.
Okay. At what point let me ask you this. Did Gary handle your family's finances for the most part while you were married?
Yep. Yes.
Did there come a time when he could not do that any longer and you took over?
I think it started with the checkbook.
Okay. And do you recall about when you might have started taking over the checkbook?
I'm not sure. Probably 2016. I don't really remember the dates because, you know, it all kind of goes together. Yeah.
And Dr. Wilson reported that at some point you started helping out with the checkbook because some bills had been missed or not been paid. Is that?
Well, that was in 2016 when we were up in Minnesota, and he came. He was up in his office there. We have a house in Wheaton, Minnesota, and we'd go there in the summer and have our vacation there, and it was fun. And he came into the living room and said to me, "Wow, I've got all the bills paid and I've got $7,000 left in the checkbook." I said, "Wow." And when we got home, I was getting the bills in the mail that the month before wasn't paid. And so I just don't know. You know,
Is that the point in time when you began taking over and helping with the checkbook?
Well, it woke me up, you know, and so I don't know exactly what day I took over the checkbook. But I remember that when Nick and Nikki were over, he'd say to Nikki, "Will you fill out this check for me?" He'd never asked me, but when Nikki came, he would ask Nikki to fill out the check, and he said, "I'll sign it." Because I can only think this, but I think it was because he couldn't write it out. His spelling got to be terrible. He was never a real good speller, but it even got worse as he
Okay.
got his dementia. And so he would ask her to write it out, and then he would sign it. That was really the first of where I saw that he couldn't do the checkbook.
Okay. I heard Dr. Wilson mention that Gary suffered from hallucinations and maybe some dream enactment at night.
I know when that happened.
Okay.
That was in 2015 when he broke his hip.
And so he was suffering hallucinations at the time.
I didn't know about it. But he was in the hospital, and he told our pastor that to be careful because there were people coming out of the wall and they might get her.
Wow.
And that was the first that I knew about it. But then when he got home, and in later years, he had people coming out of the walls, and when I would sleep with him at night, because I was afraid of him getting up alone and so forth, and he would say, "Look out, Donna, they're coming right at you." And he was serious, and he was almost screaming it because he was so afraid.
Did his dream enactment or hallucinations at night cause you to be fearful?
Oh, I was afraid. I mean, I almost thought I saw the people coming out of the wall. I was so afraid, you know. And so I would give him a few shakes and I'd say, "Gary, I'm here. You're okay. The people are gone."
Were you able to continue to sleep with him at night, or did you have to
No,
go to...
I always slept with him because I was afraid
All right.
of what would he'd either fall out of bed or he'd have these hallucinations.
And
I helped him to get up in the night to go to the bathroom because I didn't want him to fall.
Okay. And did all of that sleep interruption affect your sleep and your ability to take care of Gary?
I never thought too much of it until near the end.
Okay. And near the end, what happened?
It was awful.
How so?
I have a hard time telling you this. At the end, everything kind of fell apart. Tell me again what you want me to say.
At the end, how did Gary's acting out at night and the hallucinations affect him and you?
It was difficult. It was very, very difficult. And the day that he fell and broke his hip, his other hip, was in 2019. And it was in the afternoon. He had had a terrible night. And so did I, because he was up maybe 5-6 times during the night. And everything was wrong. I couldn't get him to eat breakfast in the morning. I was able to give him, by then he had a patch for diabetes. Okay. And that's the most wonderful thing. If you ever have diabetes, ask for the patch because it's wonderful. It tells you where you are. You just have a little meter and you push it up there and it's wonderful. Well, anyway, I couldn't get him to eat breakfast. And so we had 2 sofas, one on this side and one on this side. And so I was on this one and he was on this one sitting. And I think we both fell asleep. But I was so tired, I know I did. And then apparently he had a walker, you know, a little hand walker. And so he took that little walker down the hall to our bathroom. And then he was on his way back. And he either let his walker go for the walker landed over on the other side of the hallway, and he landed on the floor. And I was on the Davenport, didn't know this happened. And so I had many guilt feelings about that.
Yeah. When Gary was at night with the dream enactment, did that dream enactment ever cause him to hit you, even if it's...
Oh, no. He never hit me. He was never violent, in his strength to me. Never.
Did he ever make just strong movements with his arms or his legs in response to the hallucinations or the dream enactment?
Oh, to the hallucinations. He tried to fight them off.
Okay.
He'd just sit up in that bed
And how would he fight them off?
with his hands.
So he'd be swinging at things?
With his hands, yes. And he'd
Okay.
use his legs, whatever. I don't know.
Okay.
Because these people were attacking him, and he'd go like this, and he'd yell, "Get away, get away."
Wow. So there's, at issue in this case, there is a transfer of funds of approximately $127,654.09 that occurred.
Objection is?
The time frame she was referring to is just before Gary passed away. Now he's referring back to 3 years and trying to tie these two things together.
That's an unlawful objection. Your objection's overruled.
So at issue in this case is a transfer of funds that occurred on January 10th of 2017 for approximately $127,000 to purportedly purchase Aspire. At that particular time, in January 10 of 2017, do you believe Gary was a vulnerable adult based on what you know about his medical history and the symptoms you observed?
What I heard today, he wasn't.
He was or was not? I didn't hear that.
I said what I heard today, probably he was.
Okay. And also at issue is a document signed on March 30th of 2017, which would be about 2.5 months later after January 10th. Do you believe that Gary was a vulnerable adult on that date as well?
Well, Dr. Wilson said yes.
All right. And Dr. Wilson also, or pardon me, on those 2 dates, do you believe also that Gary was susceptible to being unduly influenced at those times because of his particular medical history?
I'd have to say yes.
Right. And then Dr. Wilson gave an opinion that you were also considered to be susceptible to undue influence because of all that you were going through in caring for Gary. And do you agree that on January 10th, 2017 and on March 30th, 2017, you were likely susceptible to undue influence at those dates as well?
Probably, I don't know.
Okay. Do you believe that Gary was a vulnerable adult at the times that the defendants convinced you to pay to them what you are characterizing as commission payments? And this would have started in July of 2016 and continued through about April of 2017.
The commission was between Nikki and I. I think Gary and Nick were in the kitchen, and it was just between Nikki and I.
Well, if the checks were signed or if the checks were made out to Nick Casavelli during those dates, would you agree that Gary was a vulnerable adult during those times?
Yes.
Okay. And would you also agree that Gary would have been a person susceptible to undue influence going back to July of 2016, continuing through perhaps June of 2017?
Dr. Wilson said yes. Yes.
And you agree with that testimony?
I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you recall that the defendants began assisting with managing your rental properties around September of 2015?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And if it's true that they were managing the properties from September 2015 forward until about July of 2017, do you believe that Gary was a vulnerable adult during that time?
Yes. I recognize it now.
Yeah. And do you believe he was susceptible to undue influence during that time?
Yes, I do.
All right. Catch up here. Tell me a little bit about how you came to know the defendants, Nick Cassavelli and Nicolina Castelli. How did you first get acquainted with them?
Well, I remember when they came that night to rent the house over on Cheryl, and they had their furniture with them, and you had a trailer, yeah, and you had stuff because the house was furnished, and you asked Nikki if you could put in your other stuff, and I said yes, and they rented the house. And because we were, at that time, we lived on Cheryl, directly across the street from the little house that we owned.
So let me just interrupt for a second, and I'll let you continue with your story. So essentially what you're saying is you got to know them because they wanted to rent one of your rental
They
properties.
rented one of our houses.
Okay, and so you're describing the first day that they came to rent that house.
Yes.
Okay, so go ahead, please.
And then we became good friends. And we liked them very much. I thought the world of Nikki.
And how is it that you came to be good friends? Did you do things together? Did you have telephone conferences or conversations? Did you visit together? How did that work?
Well, when we first started out, we just would see them in the yard and so forth. And then later on, when the house became available at 10124, they asked if they could move in that house.
And 10124 means 10124 West Ironwood Drive. And do you also live on Ironwood Drive?
Yes.
And about how many houses away is your house from the 10124 Ironwood Drive house?
Is it 5? 7? 7 houses.
All right. So you're just down the block from each other, is that correct?
Well, he's on this curb down here, and I'm on the straightway.
Okay. And so how often, as your relationship with the Cassavellis continued, how often would you typically speak with them during a day?
Oh, later on when I got to know them, and they lived down on Ironwood every day.
Every day?
Just about.
And was that
Real often.
Was that in person or on the telephone or a mixture of both?
In person, they came to our house.
Okay.
We were to their house a few times, but most of the time they came to ours.
Okay. And did there come a point in time when you and Gary asked Mr. and Mrs. Cassavelli to begin assisting you with various things? Mm-hmm. And isn't a good answer.
Yes. I forget. And I guess when we first started out, it would have to be with the house across the street, 10238. There was a couple that lived there, and they weren't too great in paying for the rent. And Nick and Nikki were still living at the other house on Cheryl. And then we had the flood at the house. And we had to have pictures of this flood. And so Gary said, I know who'd be able to do that. That's Nikki. So Nikki came over. I don't know if she came alone or if she came with Nick. I don't remember that. But I remember Nikki took pictures of the flood at the house. And that's really what, and then apparently Gary felt he wasn't doing so swift anymore. So in 2015, we asked we decided that we were going to get a manager to manage our houses that we had. I think we had five houses that we rented. And they were over, and I had said to them, I'm going to ask my friend Wilma, her son is in the real estate business over in Goodyear, if he'd like to oversee our houses too. And Nick and Nikki said, oh, we can do that. And so I said, good. And so they said, yes, they would do it. And they showed pictures of the houses that they had redone in Buckeye. And I don't know if you oversaw them or what, but anyway, I know you remodeled them and so forth. And I saw the pictures that Nikki showed me. And so that's how we selected them to do it. And so I never called the other man. And so that was the story.
So you began, you came to know them sometime in early 2015, and they assisted with some issues with one of your rental houses in 2015.
They were great. They oversaw the houses. They took all the complaints. They wrote the leases for them.
Did they collect the rent?
They collected the rent.
Did they help with payment of any mortgages on any of the rental properties out of the rents?
Yes, I think you did, didn't you?
You can't ask him a question.
I think so. I'm not sure who paid, because remember, I wasn't involved very much with the money part.
Okay. So during this time from 2015 and continuing through 2016 and 17, how close did you get in your relationship to Miss Castelli?
Oh, I thought the world of her. She was my best friend, and she was young and pretty, and I really liked her. I really, really liked Nikki.
You mentioned earlier that you had a son. Is your son an only child?
Yes.
So you never had a daughter?
No.
How did you view Miss Castelli in
She was it.
Was she like a daughter to you?
Yes, I could complain to her, and she would always console me or whatever.
Did you confide in her then?
Oh, yes.
Is there anything you wouldn't have told her?
Probably not. I really like Nikki.
And then tell me about Mr. Casavelli. Did you grow to confide in him in the same way that you did with Nikki Castelli?
Probably not as much because he was Gary's pal.
Okay, but you did confide in him.
Oh, yes, I could.
Okay. And,
I knew that I could ask him, and he'd help me with anything.
and you believed he was somebody that you could trust?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you and Gary then ask Mr. Casavelli and Miss Castelli to serve as agents under a power of attorney?
Is that the one that we had at the bank where he had to go, we both had to go and sign, is that?
It might be. Let me show you some exhibits and see if we can help you out with that, okay? Give me just a moment.
I know when we got ready to sell the houses that we had to have a power of attorney.
And let me back up on the power of attorney thing. I'll show you this exhibit first. This exhibit's already been admitted into evidence. It is exhibit number 4, and it's an account or an account ending in 8084, which is up on our list there. And this is an account that shows here on JOH 379. And for the jury's benefit, I'm looking down here at the bottom, you'll see this number right here, JOH 00379. That's called a Bates label number. And that's how we indexed everything so we could find things easily. On this particular page, we see an account being opened, and do you see that this account is open in the name of your husband, Gary Johansson?
Yes.
Is that a yes? There you go. And you see it's also open in the name of Nicholas Casavelli?
Yes.
And you see it's listed here as POD Nicolina Castelli.
Yes, I do.
And do you know what the POD stands for? Does that stand for payable on death designation, do you know?
No.
So, okay. Let me go to the next page here. This is page down here at the bottom, JOH 380 of Exhibit 4. And up here it shows a signature of Gary as an owner on the account. It shows Nicholas Casavelli and his signature as an owner of the account or holder. And here is listed Nicolina Castelli, and this is listing her right here as a beneficiary of that account. All right? Mm-hmm. And so you trusted them enough to share a joint account together. Is that accurate and true? As far as you know?
I guess so. Don't know.
Okay. I'm going to show you another exhibit here. Exhibit number 23. Thank you. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's marked as exhibit number 23. Would you please take a look at that? Do you see on that page your husband's signature anywhere?
No.
Let me approach again.
Oh, you mean here? Oh, that's just a nick in mine.
Let me see if I can point to it. Oh, I don't read upside down very well. Pardon me. Does this document show anywhere Nick Casavelli's name on it?
Yes.
And does that document show Nick Casavelli's signature at the bottom?
Yes.
And does that document show that it is a power of attorney being given by your husband Gary to Nick Casavelli?
Yes.
And
One moment. What's your objection?
It's not a power of attorney, Your Honor. It's an indemnification form.
Sustained.
so let me ask you to read up here at the top what this is called, please.
Affidavit in indemnification agreement for power of attorney.
All right. And do you recognize this document as part of the bank records that have been produced in this matter?
Yes.
All right. Move for admittance, Your Honor.
Any objection to the admission of Exhibit 23?
Yes, Your Honor, it's not my signature. It's not my document.
I've never seen it before.
Counsel wish to respond?
Your Honor, we obtained these from the bank via subpoena. These are records that have been produced in the ordinary course of business.
Your Honor, sidebar.
Sure.
The original power of attorneys has an indemnification clause on it. This is a forged document. I'm going to let it in if you let me attack it as being a forged document.
Well, you're always welcome to attack any of the exhibits that are in evidence.
And I'll bring the original tomorrow, the power of attorneys. They are, what he's about to produce are just as altered.
I told you yesterday, You can't bring duplicates, but if you found something different in your documents other than what you believe was disclosed, you need to show me, this is a disclosure document, it says this was given, and this is opposite of what I was given, or different, or altered.
This document is claiming to have my signature. I've never seen it
Well, and you
before.
can make that argument, but that has nothing to do with whether it's admitted.
You
Right,
can
I
have a
get it.
copy of it if you signed it.
I just want to let the court know so you don't yell at me.
But you don't have to let me know anything. You're welcome to contest any of the exhibits. Yes, sir. Thank you. Any objection to the admission of Exhibit 23?
No.
23 is admitted.
Thank you. May I see that a moment? Thank you. Now that it's been admitted, I want to show this, Donna, to you and to the jury. And up here, what does that read again? What's the title there, Donna?
Affidavit of an indemnification agreement for power of attorney.
And over here, it lists that this document is going to be is in regard to Nick Casavelli. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And that this is actually, it says here that the attorney, in fact, is the agent of whom?
Donna Johansson.
That's you. So basically, is it your understanding that this document is asking Nick to be a power of attorney for you?
Yes.
All right. And this shows a date that this power of attorney is being executed. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Objection.
And what is that?
One moment. What's your objection?
It's not a power of attorney.
We will show you one.
I will
Please refer to it as Exhibit
rephrase.
23. Thank
I'll
you.
refer to it. So does Exhibit 23 show a date here being signed?
11/15/16.
And what does that mean? If we translate 11/15/16 into months, what would that be?
November 15th.
Of 2016? Okay. And then this document purports to be signed here by whom? Is that Nick Casavelli's signature? You've seen his signature before?
A long time ago.
Okay, but you've seen it on documents? And this looks to, and you got to say yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, nodding your head doesn't, yeah, there we go.
Doesn't pick up on the record.
Yeah. So, and then this document is attested to by a notary public here at the bottom. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
And that is signed by Stacy Mixon. And do you happen to recall if Stacy Mixon works at any particular bank that you did banking at? You don't recall that name?
I don't know that name.
Okay, thank you very much. May I approach?
Yes.
Oh, exhibit number 24.
Thank you.
Same thing, Your Honor.
Same response.
Refer to it as
An indemnification, because that's what it is. It says.
Approach.
Yes, sir.
I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibit number 24. If you'll take a look at that, please. At the top, can you please tell us what this document is titled?
Affidavit of indemnification agreement for power of attorney.
And is this this is very similar to the last exhibit you just looked at. Are you familiar with this document as well?
Yes.
And who is giving the indemnification in this agreement? Is it you or your husband or someone else?
It's Gary.
Gary. And who is he giving it to?
To Nick.
Move for admission of exhibit number 24, Your Honor.
Any objection to the admission of Exhibit 24?
no.
24 is admitted. Yes, sir.
Put this up on the screen so everybody can see. Donna, we'll just go through this with the jury now that they can see the document. Can you read the title again, please?
Affidavit of indemnification agreement for power of attorney.
And over here, does it indicate who is being nominated as the attorney in fact? or pardon me, as the agent,
Nick Casavelli.
okay? And he is going to be acting as the agent for whom?
Gary Johansson.
All right? And so Gary is referred to as the principal, is that correct?
Yes,
And Nick Casavelli is referred to as the attorney in fact.
yes.
All right. And do you understand or do you know that the attorney in fact is the equivalent of a power of attorney?
Yes.
Agent under a power of attorney?
Objection.
I'm asking if she knows.
What's your objection?
He's trying to equate it to being a power of attorney. It's
He's-
indemnification.
Your objection is overruled. He's permitted to ask if she knows.
All right. And then if you could read this paragraph right here, Ms.
That the attorney in fact is a person named as attorney in fact by that Nick Casavelli, power of attorney for Gary Johansson, the principal, dated 11/15/16, the durable power of attorney.
Thank you. And so this indemnification agreement is then basically asserting that they have received a power of attorney at the bank, naming Mr. Casavelli as the agent under. Is that your understanding?
Yes, I do.
All right. And let's read this paragraph here, which talks about that durable power of attorney.
That the durable power of attorney is good, valid, and enforceable under the law in all respects in accordance with its terms, has not been revoked, amended, modified, canceled, or terminated, and has not been. Where am I?
I'm sorry, I moved it on you, didn't I? Up and terminated and has
And has not been rendered ineffectively by the disability, incompetency, or incapable of the principal, and. Want me to read the next?
And then read the next paragraph as well,
That
telling
the
us.
attorney in fact desires and is authorized by the durable power of attorney to conduct banking transactions with Compass Bank in the name of the principal, including and without limitation to obtaining balances on accounts, endorsing and negotiating checks, opening, closing deposits within or in depositing into or withdrawing from all accounts and certificates of deposit in the name of the principal or in the name of the principal along with one or more joint account owners.
Thank you. And then as we go down here, do you recognize that signature there?
Yes, that's next.
That's Nick Casavelli's.
Yes,
And then down here as well, do we see what date is this signed on?
the 16th day of November 2016.
And is this document notarized?
Yes, it is.
And who is the name of the notary, please?
Stacy Nixon.
Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. That brings us to our afternoon break. Members of the jury, please enjoy your break. Remember the admonition. We'll see you back in 15 minutes.
All rise.
Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect the jurors are excused. We are in the presence of counsel as well as the parties. I have to bring up the issue with the cell phones again. Y'all were texting during Ms. Johansson's testimony. So I'm going to order at this point in time, no more cell phones in the courtroom, period.
We weren't texting. We
Doesn't
were
matter
looking up
what the excuse is.
definition of Dr.
I don't want to
Wilson.
hear the explanation. I'm just going to order right now, no more cell phones in the courtroom, period. You're welcome to use them on your break. I do not want them out in this courtroom whatsoever during the course of the trial.
What about the documents we have stored on the phone?
You're going to have to figure it out, but you're not going to have the cell phone in this courtroom. Enjoy your break. I'll see you back in 15 minutes.
Does that apply to everyone or just us?
I'm telling you, two of you and this table over here, the parties, no phones out. Thank you.
I didn't know the definition of diabetes.
I was looking at something for Dr. Wilson, which
Outside and stretch your legs for a minute.
Doesn't matter.
We'll do
We can do that outside the courtroom too.
Yeah, we can do that outside.
Absolutely. She's just talking about inside the courtroom.